Welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. If you are new to the show, this is Tim Smith. He has been a lifesaver in the area of being able to shed some light on some of the work the HSCA has done. He has written a book on the HSCA, a little bit more of a kind of critical perspective of them. But through I guess probably like 7 times now you've been on the show, we've discussed various aspects of the JFK assassination and the RFK assassination. And if you're listening to this episode, hopefully you listened to the one before with Craig, where we discussed a lot about probably what we're going to be discussing today about Tim's interest in the case. But Tim, do you mind introducing yourself to everyone out there listening who has not heard of you before?
Sure. Thanks, Robbie. My name is Tim Smith. As Robbie said, I wrote a book on the House Select Committee on Assassinations called Hidden in Plain Sight, where I go through the public testimonies of 52 witnesses, which was their way to present the evidence that they had accumulated to the American public. And other areas I've been interested in too, but that's probably been the one that I've had the most interest in.
Why did you research the Kennedy assassination? It's a very simple, basic question, but I feel like it can get lost in the minutia because you have to care about what you're researching, not just the interest in like, oh, it's a mystery, which a lot of people, I did myself, got into. And I feel like learning more about the administration and the people behind it has only enhanced my knowledge on why I'm researching and I believe so much in what I believe in.
Sure. Well, I was in the second grade when it happened. I was 7 years old, and my mom was a big Kennedy fan. And so she would, even at a young age, she would kind of school me in on who Kennedy was, the Kennedy administration, as much as I could understand at age 7. But I was sitting on the couch with her watching TV when Ruby shot Oswald. And so I don't remember much about it because, like I said, I was only 7. But it wasn't long after that. By 1973, at that point, I would have been about 16, 17 years old. And I got really interested in the case. I think my first book I ever was confronted with was David Lifton's Best Evidence, which my mom had and had read. And then I went to the local library. Not a whole lot to choose from because I was from a small town, but they did have David Chime's book, Contract on America, I think is the name of it. Although it has other titles, one which may be a British title. But I was really taken in by Chime's book. I thought he was very bright, which of course he is, very articulate. I thought he presented the evidence well. And my mom leaned toward that theory that the mob had did it, as does David Chime. So that was my early connection. And as you said, the idea of it being a mystery and all that, it is, and it kind of sucks you in. But as you also said, the more I learned about John Kennedy and his administration, I thought that they were doing some good stuff in civil rights, peace programs, things like that. I was just attracted to that. I'm always attracted to people who are nice and kind, for goodness sakes. And so to take him out in broad daylight in a major city, I thought was just such a travesty. And so I thought I would look into it with really no agenda as far as what I thought happened. I thought, well, I'll just look at the evidence. And the more I looked at the evidence, it seemed pretty obvious to me fairly early on that there was something rotten in Denmark here, and that there was eventually what I would come to believe was a massive cover up, both to commit the crime and to cover up the crime. And that eventually led me to the House Committee on Assassinations. I was also very lucky because I live about 35 minutes from Notre Dame. And at that point, G. Robert Blakey, who was the chief counsel for the HSCA, was teaching law at their law school. And so I called down there. He was very kind. I went down there and had about a 2-hour talk with him, if I remember right. And I ended up writing an article on it. The very first thing I ever got published was an article in a journal called DPQ, Deep Politics Quarterly. And I remember I named my article "My Dinner with Blakey." Of course, it's a takeoff of the movie "My Dinner with Andre," which I was trying to be funny, I guess. I don't, I don't know, but Blakey was very charming. He was very forthcoming. I thought he was honest with me. Of course, we now know things that we didn't know then that would have completely changed that conversation. Because one of Blakey's linchpins, in fact, it's sometimes referred to as Blakey's linchpin, was the neutron activation analysis, where supposedly early on the bullets and everything was connected to Oswald's rifle to the exclusion of all others. We now know that's absolute pure nonsense. In the early 2000s, people came on board who had doctorate degrees in metallurgy. They weren't chemists like Dr. Vincent Gwynn, who did all the work for the Warren Commission and for the HSCA. Eric Randage and other people who have no interest whatsoever in the Kennedy assassination. They're just looking at it from a hard science standpoint. They said this is just absolutely junk science, as Gary Aguilar likes to say. In so much that the one office that did this type of work for the FBI was shut down immediately, and they no longer even consider the idea. Well, this bullet has so much antimony, and this has so much zinc or silver, therefore it must be. And they proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that that's just pure nonsense. It just doesn't work that way. So the old idea, in fact, this is a good point, Robbie, because early on the the way I would say it is that the evidence became very heterogeneous. In other words, it just didn't match up. You had one side saying one thing, another side saying another thing, and there was no way to bring those two things together. Well, first of all, if you have the right data, then the evidence in any case should end up being homogeneous, not heterogeneous. Everything should fit together like a puzzle. But it wasn't. Early on you had Blakey saying this about the neutron activation analysis. And I remember thinking at the time, I have no comeback for that. If Blakey is right and Dr. Vincent Gwynn is right, then I don't know what to do with that evidence because it just doesn't fit the puzzle that I see before me. Well, in the early 2000s, people like Eric Randage and a guy named Spiegelman and a guy named Grant, there was two separate professional papers written for professional journals, and both of them just obliterated the findings of both the Warren Commission and the House Committee on Assassinations. No longer can we say, well, that bullet can be linked to Oswald's rifle to the exclusion of all those. Well, that changes everything. That for me anyway, that makes the evidence incredibly homogeneous now for the first time, because for the longest time I didn't know what to do with a lot of you also heard, as a quick follow-up to this, that Kennedy's head goes forward in frame 312 and then backward in 313. Well, guess what? A systems engineer by the name of David Wimp from Eugene, Oregon, totally obliterates that theory. He says that's not what's going on. You guys missed it. 312 is preternaturally clear in the Zapruder film. 313 is just a blur mess for the most part, probably because I assume because Zapruder jiggled the camera. And so what that did though, it caused these these elongated swipes to appear on the film when you look at it, especially when you're looking at it from a still photograph standpoint. So the measurements that were taken, which looks like JFK's head going forward, is maybe 0.95 of an inch, not even an entire inch does the head go forward, as your head and my head would go forward in any car we're riding in at almost any given moment. It shows absolutely nothing. But if you don't understand that Wimp revealed what was really going on here, and when you look at frame 313 as a still photograph, look at Connolly's forehead, look at the bar overhead on the limousine. Everything is elongated, and because you have these swipes going on, because he jiggled the camera, and nobody noticed this for like almost 35 years or so. But then when it came out, it's like, oh my God, how could I have missed that? It's very, very plain. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. So those are two examples of evidence that early on now can be thrown in the dumpster because they no longer fit and they just don't work. Well, that's a big deal. If you can't link those bullets to Oswald's rifle, if in fact it is Oswald's rifle, and as you know, I think the documentary that Stone did, I can't remember the name of JFK
Revisited.
off the top of my head, but anyway, you know what I'm talking about, and most people will. In that recent documentary, just it's 3-4 years old, they prove that the rifle that's taken out of the Texas School Book Depository, supposedly Oswald's rifle, the shoulder harness doesn't work because it's associated with the side of the rifle, not the end of the rifle, which is what you see in Oswald's backyard photographs. So all these things coming out as time has gone on, I think what has happened is what really threw the JFK case for a loop was just bad science and bad scientists who were either saying what they were saying because they wanted promotions or they wanted accolades of some sort. But once you strip everything away, and now you have scientists who have no interest in the Kennedy assassination at all. They're doing science and saying, "No, fellas, you got it wrong." It has changed the landscape completely for me, Robbie.
Well, before we get into all that evidence that you kind of just described, I wanted to ask, even with all that you find out, it's still hard to research something if you do not care about the person who maybe the crime is being committed to. So I'm curious, what was your opinion of the Kennedy administration or Kennedy himself? I don't prescribe to the Camelot theory. I don't believe he was all good, and I think a lot of people like MLK historians and others who have different opinions on JFK than maybe the Kennedy listeners might have. And I also think when it comes to the conspiracy, nobody cared in the administrations of power that could have done anything to find maybe the truth of the assassination. It was a whole, let's just get this out of the way because the domino theory or whatever you want to say of leading to a nuclear war if other countries are being blamed. And they didn't do their job properly on purpose because, like I said, lack of caring and a lack of nobody really talked about it afterwards. They kind of just like scoffed over it and just moved on to the next problems. Again, it becomes a little bit difficult situation. Me and Craig kind of talked about a little bit because there's a lot of people on Air Force One that stated Robert F. Kennedy was the one that told LBJ he needed to be sworn in when he did his swearing in. And a lot of people might have problems with that. But it makes a lot more sense when you're considering the fact that he's acting as an attorney general, not a person who just lost his brother. So I wanted to get your opinion kind of on the Kennedy administration, at least when it came to, you hear rumors of LBJ's involved and all these types of things that come out. Obviously, there's a lot of fingers that can be pointed at a lot of different individuals, but I wanted to get your opinion on Kennedy himself and why you felt so strong to keep researching, even despite, if it's a guy you don't like, you're not going to care if he got screwed over in a certain way.
Absolutely. I think with Kennedy, for me, I grew up in a home that was very pro Kennedy to begin with. So as a young child growing up, you kind of a lot of times people will adopt and adapt whatever their parents are. So initially, it was probably just that. But eventually, as I, end up going to college and reading and becoming more interested in the Kennedy administration, I liked a lot of what they were doing. Were they perfect? No, as you have said. But I believe that Kennedy's speech on civil rights was groundbreaking. Sometimes there is that disconnect between what you should do and what you can do and what's politically motivated because you try to do the right thing, even though it is the right thing. It can backfire politically, and then your agenda is thrown overboard, whether you get elected or not. And so I think that some of that may have been going on. I think part of it too is they weren't aware because people tend not to be aware of the things that they may not want to be aware of. But when it finally came to the surface, and Kennedy went on national TV and started talking about that Black people need the same advantages that we have and the same opportunities that we have. And if we can't do that, then we're really not much of a country. That speech to me is incredibly moving. Whatever else Kennedy may have set up until that point, I don't really care because that speech really marked a massive change as far as I'm concerned. And since I'm very pro civil rights, I was very attracted to that, as I was with a lot of things that Martin Luther King Jr. was saying, despite the fact that none of these people are perfect. And if that's what you're hunting for, well, then everyone will eventually disappoint you. So I don't look for perfection. I try to look for things that override a lot of that some of the time. So yeah, I thought Kennedy's peace prospects were good. The way he handled the Cuban Missile Crisis, I thought was very impressive. Not to mention, like I said, his stuff on civil rights. So yeah, you're right. And because of that, initially I liked John Kennedy because my mom liked John Kennedy, but that quickly fell by the wayside. And I realized, yeah, I think he's a good and decent man overall, flawed like we all are, but a good and decent man. And he's really trying to do some good things. So yeah, you're right. If I didn't care about John Kennedy at all, I would have quit doing this a long time ago. I mean, frankly, I'm not going to probably put a lot of time into it if it's the assassination of Chester Arthur. Not that I'm anti-Chester Arthur. He actually did some good things after the death of Garfield. But you're right. You don't care. You just won't look into it. I think you're really spot on with that.
And especially depending on whatever you kind of side with when it comes to viewing his administration, you can believe the theories like LBJ did it, the mob did it, all these other things. Now, if you notice, if you do not prescribe to that theory, you tend to say that information that comes out of that theory or support for that theory is wrong or it is wrong, false information. Um,
Sure.
we know that Kennedy had mob connections based
No
on whatever
question.
his senior was involved in.
Sure.
We know there was a contentious relationship with LBJ.
Yep.
And we know that there was issues when it came to the organizations like the FBI and the CIA that Kennedy had sworn to kind of dismantle and get rid of. Uh, the main thing is when you look at these theories, I guess what for you is something you have to try and avoid when you're just looking at a person you care about and his death, and you're starting to notice that certain things are not adding up. Again, a good point to this is the fact of witness testimony, something you helped Craig with, especially when it comes with the RFK assassination and plotting where witnesses are in the pantry.
Yeah,
Witness testimony can sometimes be strong, and a lot of people will deny those claims. They'll say, no, you can't trust a witness testimony. You have to kind of put some weight into it
I
and
agree.
match it with other things. When you expect the government or the agencies that are supposed to be doing the documentation to be behind something of a crime that you are looking into. So obviously they're not going to record. Again, the FBI, and we know from the HSCA, left out a lot of information from the Warren Commission. Hoover did. And they also did the same thing with the HSCA. What is it? James Gale wouldn't even answer the question from Tom Sawyer, who was or Herbert Sawyer. Tom Sawyer's a book. Herbert Sawyer, who was on the HSCA, asking him, what the hell is a 201 file? And he
Right.
says, I don't know. He goes, well, I would think that you involved it in the Bureau for 30 something years. You would know what the hell a 201 file is. You know,
Right.
like there's these big kind of things that come out where you have to stop kind of analyzing it as a basic crime. And this is how we do the procedures. Same thing with motive. You can't just be who gained from Kennedy's death. Well, a lot of people gained from Kennedy's death, and a lot of people did not care. And sadly, those people were in positions that could have done something and found truth, but they didn't do so. So, analyzing motive, I guess, is the main kind of question here, but really trying not to fall in the pitfalls that can be the most obvious answer. You know, it's not like Michael Shermer says, where Occam's razor, the most, obvious thing is probably the one that did it, and that's a lone nut. And I'm like, okay, well, how do you explain a lone nut that can't be reported seen at the book depository building, can't even be identified with that rifle? You know, he has a rifle apparently, but Marina didn't know the difference between a rifle and a shotgun. And then also at the same time, he admits on multiple accounts to multiple people that how much he loved Kennedy and how great he would be for this country.
Yep, I agree. I think you bring up a lot of good points, and it really has helped me reflect to think about some of the things that you just brought up. Real quick, and then I'll answer your question more fully. The whole Shermer thing about Occam's razor. I mean, I've taught philosophy for the last 35, 40 years, and I'm not sure Michael Shermer understands what Occam's razor really is, because just because you say the complicated theory is most likely the correct complicated theory, I could argue from a conspiracy standpoint that that's the easiest theory, and therefore I apply Occam's razor to that. So it seems a little self-serving to define it the way he does. But one thing I've done, and this is answering your question hopefully a little bit better, is that the older I've gotten, the longer I've looked at the evidence, the less overly dogmatic I have become. For example, recently I've just went back and taken another look at David Schime's book because I have a really good friend of mine who knows this case almost as well as anybody I've ever met, and he is absolutely convinced that it was a mob hit. Now, just because you say it was a mob hit doesn't mean no one else was involved, as if they just went in lone wolf. I don't think that's probably what happened. They are probably connected to someone, whether it's a CIA. We know there's a connection between the mob and the CIA with Cuba. So that's not a big stretch. So I really do try to keep an open mind. In my book, I do tend to argue, I think, in a very laid back way that it was some combination between the military industrial complex and the CIA. Very small number in each one. You wouldn't need very many because as I look at it, especially the parade route, I see them all over the place. But again, I'm not wedded to that. You know, again, I've gone back and looked at Scheim's work and I've looked at other people's work, and I think I understand how people could make a good case for the mob, to be honest with you. I really do. Now, am I completely convinced at this point? Oh, I'm completely convinced of anything. But my theory has always been, Robbie, look at the evidence. Does the evidence indicate a conspiracy? And to me, the evidence does indicate a conspiracy. Who was behind it? I don't know for sure that anybody knows the answer to that question. I think there are certain fingerprints that you do see that kind of trump other possibilities. But I try to remain open to that, you know, just because, well, I don't agree with David Scheim or I don't agree with this guy. Okay, that's fine to do. There's nothing wrong with that because we do have to take a position probably at some point. But I'm less ridiculous about that than I used to be.
Now, when you're looking at like let's say the Kennedy administration, if you were going to analyze, like we've mentioned, the industrial complex, military industrial complex, a lot of people bring up the Federal Reserve and kind of Kennedy's policies of kind of getting rid of the Federal Reserve. And this being one of the theories that someone from obviously with a connection to that, whether it's the Rockefellers or whoever, had the most to gain from Kennedy being assassinated. I think a lot of these are really good points. A lot of people bring up the fact of the Vietnam War. A lot of people bring up the same situation when it comes to civil rights. Is this reasons that there's a lot of reasons, and that's when you start looking for motive and you're trying to analyze who. I think the best thing to possibly do, and it's kind of what I've learned through our conversations and through conversations with Craig, is just being able to state what is fact.
Right, I
And
agree.
so far, what is fact is that a lot of the members of the Warren Commission did not believe in the single bullet theory or all
At least
these things
three.
that get propped up. And a lot of factual things when it comes to an account, you can look at the Secret Service Administration and realize that we have a very warped perception about how they operate. A lot of them were drunks, and this was a problem with Johnson's administration as well too. They did a more fear of them protecting you than if you would have just got the FBI to do it. And then also factual evidence when it comes to destruction of documents and questions that weren't asked to certain witnesses that should have been asked, like in the JFK assassination.
I agree. I think that and the general Abraham Bolden, who indicated how racist the Secret Service was toward Kennedy, for goodness sakes. So all kind of nonsense going on there.
They hated Catholics more than they hated someone of a different color.
Oh, absolutely, no question about that. I mean, you could make a good case that this country has never been very pro-Catholic. It's been Protestant almost from the get-go, probably because of the Puritans. But nonetheless, I think the one thing that kind of comes out for me is, how do I say this? Um, sure, there were things like that going on. There's no question about that. But at some point, we have to at least try to move beyond that and see if you can see just a little clearly when it comes to some of the stuff. And that's not easy to do sometimes. It really isn't. Um, but I don't know.
Especially in the case of the Kennedy assassination. I mean, you got
Yeah,
to look at the number of figures. I mean, it's the best fairy tale all wrapped up into one. I'm not saying calling a conspiracy a fairy tale. I think that's pretty evident that there was a 100% evidence of a cover up. But looking at the mob figures that are involved, you got the FBI, you got the CIA, you got MK Ultra. If you go far enough, you got other countries being involved. Yeah, it's very complicated and messy.
right. I think, well, whoever did it, here's what I would say, Rob. Whoever did it had the ability to control the autopsy. That thing was controlled from start to finish. So I don't think we need to look further than who was there controlling the. Well, that was military. It was in a military hospital. There were military people there. When they would try to probe wounds, they would say that's enough, doctor. Just proceed. So the doctors didn't even have full latitude on to do a proper autopsy. If that's true, and I'm not saying that seals the deal, but it certainly implicates the military being at least part of the cover up, if not the orchestration of the. And of course, they hated Kennedy. They hated Kennedy probably because he was going to pull out of Vietnam, and that means no more promotions, no more pay raises, no more adulation. Uh, People who are in the military tend to be favorable to a war, and so in that sense, I think the autopsy speaks volumes to what's going on here. I really do. Because, I mean, let's think about it, Robbie. Here's the President of the United States. I mean, this is probably the most important autopsy in the history of our country. And they have three autopsy doctors, none of which who had ever performed a gunshot wound autopsy in their entire lives. That's odd. I mean, as American citizens, we should just be incensed by that. Are you kidding? I would get a better autopsy at the local hospital than he got. I mean, that's just ridiculous. Part of that was I'm sure Jackie wanted to hurry up, Bobby wanted to hurry up with it. Let's get this thing done. But nonetheless, sorry, we have to do a legit. And they made all kinds of mistakes. They weighed the brain wrong. They didn't locate certain wounds. I mean, I have to believe that you and I probably could have almost done as good a job as they did, for goodness sakes. So yeah, does that indicate for sure that the military? No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying it certainly doesn't look good, though. I'll tell you that.
Me and Craig actually talked about this. He kind of had the same view you had. I don't disagree on a lot of it, but there's some parts where I'm like, I think the selection of the hospital, Ken or Jackie wanted a naval hospital.
Oh, absolutely.
That was selected, and I believe that could have been an open choice of which one you wanted to go to. But it
Sure.
still boggles my mind as much as like Joseph Alsop calling on the 25th of November, telling Johnson multiple times in different phone calls that you need to have a blue ribbon committee. You need to establish a committee of people. It wasn't Johnson might have created the Warren Commission, but that was not his idea.
No.
And him saying that if you start sending a bunch of federal agents into Texas, you're going to have a problem with Texas. This is Texas jurisdiction. Well, if he knew that, then why would he remove the body from Parkland Hospital when Earl Rose could have done it and done what Earl Rose has always stated in interviews, that if he would have just done the autopsy there, it would have squashed all conspiracies?
You and I may not even be talking right now.
Well, it would be a sense of the fact that he was doing anything to try and help Jackie. And a lot of people, again, I have those phone calls on the channel. They're weird and interesting to listen to, but he's a Southerner, and this is what they would call, like smoozing up or just trying to do something to cheer somebody up with that Texas style that he has. And it can come off as like them being romantic, which it's not. But he actually cared about Jackie. He called her a lot and wished the kids Christmas and all these types of things. He tried to stay in touch,
Right.
but it was hard for Jackie. But again, he was not leaving Dallas without Jackie. And
Not a
the
chance.
only way Jackie was leaving if JFK's body came with. And that's when the Secret Service did whatever they had to secure the safety of the president.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure that means that they were part of some cover up. I never have believed that. I think what if I'm reading you correctly, the Secret Service wanted to get the body out of there because that was their president. They had lost their man and they were probably somewhat embarrassed by that. So let's get the body out of here and help Jackie out. Don't leave the body behind with her. What I don't think there's a conspiracy because that any more than what you said earlier, just because he had an autopsy at a military hospital doesn't mean that's part of a conspiracy. What it means is Bethesda is a naval hospital. JFK was in the Navy. Makes perfect sense. There was some talk early on, maybe take him over to Walter Reed, which is an Army hospital, but they took him to a Navy hospital probably because JFK was in the Navy. I don't think there's anything sinister going on there. Well, what happened once he got there, that's a whole different ballgame, maybe. I don't know. But because that autopsy is just nonsense. Oh my God, it's embarrassing. How all that happened, we'll never probably know that answer.
I guess I try and take it more out of the ballpark of it being like they sent him to this hospital because they knew they could orchestrate or control. I would think that it would probably be the easiest way to mess up something and not find the truth of something. If you're just rushing everything so quickly, trying to get this problem over with, you're going to miss some steps. And I think with the body being sent to Bethesda, they could have easily called somebody to be there and who had
Easily.
experience to go do that. And also they watched the autopsy, and whether you want to believe it was Curtis LeMay, like in Oliver Stone's movie, or if you want to believe it was Berkeley that was sitting there and telling them what they can probe into and what they can look at. That's a problem if you're trying to conduct an autopsy. It's no longer your husband. It's no longer your friend. It is the president of the United States, and this is a bigger question that we have to answer.
Right.
But again, that's where I try and bring it. There's still conspiracy there. The conspiracy factor is that it's not a proper investigation.
Oh, it's not.
And they knew that they didn't do the job that they were supposed to do because, again, the lack of care, the incompetence, the lying, the covering up of a bad job that they did do, which got exposed with Dr. Humes later on, where he didn't even give a good explanation of why he was 5 inches or so lower on the
Yeah.
back wound. Like he didn't
Right.
have a good answer to it. Like, would you argue that actually you were off by this much? I guess. Well,
Yeah.
you guess. I mean, it's a big margin of error you're selecting here.
Yeah. Well, when the HSCA asked him, Dr. Humes, our forensic pathology panel disagrees with you on the location of the head wound. Of course, as you know, Humes placed it slightly to the right of midline and 2.5 centimeters above the external occipital protuberance. Well, the HSCA forensic panel looked at it, and there's this wound in JFK's cowlick area, which is about 4 inches or 10 centimeters. Now, just to put this in perspective, and Gary Aguilar says this, and I think he says, compare this to a football field. He said, where Humes places the wound would be on the 5-yard line, where the HSCA places the wound is on the other 5-yard line. That is a massive, massive. We're talking about the ability to measure with a metric ruler. And you're telling me that Humes may have never have done an autopsy, but I'm going to assume this guy could measure accurately with a metric ruler. And when they say to him, we don't like where you place the wound, I'm thinking, okay, you need to clarify this because he was there. The HSCA Forensic Pathology Panel are looking at autopsy photographs. That's all. They didn't have the body in front of him. Humes had the body in front of him. He says, this is where the wound was. HSCA says, nope, you missed it by 10 centimeters. I'm thinking, what? And what I discovered is that so-called wound in the cowlick area is not a wound. And Ida Dox was told to superimpose something at that exact point by looking at pathology books, taking a wound from that pathology book, and then superimposing it in JFK's cowlick area. What's his name? Dr. Michael Bodden, who was the head of the forensic pathology panel, he told me that. Because I asked him, I said, did you give pictures of gunshot wounds to Ida? He goes, absolutely, we did. I said, why would you do that? I said, the autopsy photograph should be enough, shouldn't it? He says, well, we wanted to make sure that people knew where the wound was, to which I'm thinking to myself, and I did not say this to him, yeah, where you thought the wound may have been. But if there's a wound in the cowlick area, and all you got to do is look at the back of the head photographs or the autopsy photographs. Look at the original, whatever that means. Then look at Ida Dox's drawing. And if you can't see the difference between her superimposed wound and what looks to be like a dry blood droplet in the autopsy photographs, then we're blind. Because to me, it is as plain as a nose on my face. If that's true, if what I just said is true, that should send shivers through our body. That is completely sinister to manipulate the evidence by that. And Bodden absolutely admitted. Now, he didn't say we were manipulating the evidence, but he admitted, yeah, we gave pictures of gunshot wounds to Ida. I think I sent a lot of these papers to you where they're sending Ida memo. Ida, you can do better. We need to get gunshot wounds for pictures for Ida. It's like they don't even try to cover it up, for goodness sakes. So they're putting a wound there. Keep in mind, the HSCA Forensic Pathology Panel never saw the body. They only saw pictures. Humes at least saw the body. And while he may have bungled the autopsy, I just find it hard to believe that he could mismeasure that badly. I mean, a sixth grader isn't going to make that kind of a mistake. So I don't know.
Well, I think you land in the area where there's unexplainable things like why did the brain go missing?
Sure.
It's very weird for evidence to go missing, especially something as important as that. But also at the same time, you look at the number of pressures that are applied to a lot of people that were kind of handling this situation. And again, that's where slip ups can happen as well, too. I even think that you have testimony from Burke Griffin to the HSCA, who was part of the secondary committee or secondary team on the Warren Commission of young lawyers that were drafting up the Warren report. He admitted to the mistakes that the Warren report was written with very bad language,
He did.
was not articulated correctly. And he also stated that he thought that the Warren Commission sacrificed speed for elections. Obviously, there was a big focus on the political stuff. People's jobs didn't just stop to focus on the Kennedy assassination. He should have picked retired people or people that had time and did have a lot of experience dealing with commissions and things of this sort to be able to lead the Warren Commission. But he didn't. He left it up to a bunch of young kids, and at the same time, others who were supposed to probably overlook their work that were dealing with issues like Richard Russell was dealing with Panama. He's being asked guidance questions about Vietnam from Lyndon Johnson. There was not a large focus of him dealing with the Warren Commission. He did have problems with certain members on the commission, like Earl Warren. I think in a phone call, he states that Earl Warren's putting this communist on the freaking commission or something like that.
Right.
He had issues with certain things and also issues with the magic bullet theory. He didn't understand how someone can miss the road completely and then somehow get a hit like that on Kennedy.
Good point.
Yes, and these were all things that were okay to say on a phone call that was going to get released something however many years later, but it's not something you want to put into the report that there was doubt from these certain individuals. And again, people caring about the political situation. Why did JFK and a lot of MLK people, historians, upset at JFK? Because he was going to wait till he was reelected before he started focusing hardcore on these civil rights bills and other things.
No question about that. He drug his feet, to be sure.
And again, this is kind of leads into RFK a little bit. There's a change in RFK, and a lot of people bring it up to the fact that his brother was killed. That might be true.
Right.
The thing is, though, he went to understand what politics is really like. What Johnson already kind of knew, that, he states in phone calls that Kennedy wouldn't go over on the Hill and have a beer with these guys And that's why none of his bills were able to get anywhere, any movement going on with them. Johnson passed civil rights. He knew how to either blackmail people or do something to get his leverage and be
No
able to
question.
have some friendly banter. Now, with RFK, when he starts kind of going up to the 68 and he's got the confidence and he's getting ready, basically everyone's saying he's going to be president,
Right.
and he gets killed. There's that time beforehand where he was getting fed up with politics. He did not want to deal with it anymore. He thought that he could play the game and he still would not win until there's a thing that happens in 65 and kind of closer to 66 where he becomes close to Hoover.
Yeah.
And they're talking about wiretapping has gone skyrocketed up. Whether it's wiretapping of the mob or organized crime, it gets them upset, sure. But Hoover thought, hey, he's seeing things from my perspective now. In my opinion, I'm starting to notice, I think RFK leveraged or used Hoover to understand some of his tactics that the FBI used, and he used that to his own benefit. Because you see LBJ support RFK, like he kind of has always done, even though there wasn't that great of a relationship there. But RFK was making moves, and he was basically claiming himself a seat, not just by the people's vote, but by where he needed it, by the people in those administrations and those positions of power that could easily stop him from getting that seat.
Right. I don't think there's any doubt what you said earlier that the issuing of the Warren report was done very speedily. It is the 888-page report is released at the I think September 24th of 64. That's just what 6 weeks before the election. That's not by accident. And then the accompanying 26 volumes, I think, were released in November. I think that was done after the election. But the main point is the report, and that gets done about 6 weeks before the election. I don't think that's by accident. I think they were speeding things through, and when you do that, you're going to make mistakes. The one person who was at more Warren Commission meetings, talked to more witnesses, asked more questions than anyone was Allen Dulles, who Kennedy, as you know, had fired as the head of the CIA. Why would you have someone like that who is not a friend of John Kennedy's at all? Why is he pretty much running the Warren Commission?
Just to clarify, he attended the most, and it was only 16% of the number of interviews they had conducted for the Warren Commission.
Yeah, think about that. And he finished in first place. That's incredible. It really is. And we know, from memos that we now have and other data that apparently Ford was running back to Hoover constantly, giving him updates constantly. A lot of people don't realize when Hoover appeared before the Warren Commission, they taped his testimony, which of course you will never see, because then they had a transcript from those tapes of his testimony, and it was horrifyingly edited. So what you see as a final copy probably wasn't even close to what he actually said to the Warren Commission.
That might have been the work of LBJ and Meyer Feldman on that one. There's a phone call talking about what Hoover might have stated to the commission about his testimony and things, and they thought he was being very critical of LBJ and others. Even though he worked for them, Hoover was a person that would call it like it is, and that kind of inflamed on him a little bit. That's what I always found fascinating about him. He's a Boy Scout. He does everything the way he thinks that this is how this is going to go, because everything is an attack on America, any communist, any of these types of things. Now, that came with increased paranoia, but not only paranoia of outside forces, but paranoia inside as well, too.
Well,
And
go ahead.
I was going to say, and that kind of leads into what the FBI was kind of dealing with. The FBI was looking at not trying to be on Hoover's bad list. So if you have agents that are in this mindset of doing exactly what Hoover wants, exactly when he says it, you're getting questions that me and Craig had kind of covered, which was, have you ever seen Lee Harvey Oswald? Do you know if Lee Harvey Oswald went to the book depository on the 24th or 22nd? Do you know Jack Ruby? And that's why every FBI document with these witnesses, why don't you just ask the right questions? Did you see something other than something coming from the book depository building?
Exactly. We forget sometimes that Hoover would have been mandatorily retired, I think it was January of 65 or something like that. But then when Johnson comes in, he gives him a lifelong position. That's kind of important, I'm thinking. I'm not saying there's conspiracy there. I'm just saying, the winds of change were certainly upon us at that point. And, the day after Hoover dies, his files were completely incinerated, never to be seen again. And we'll never see them because they're gone. They were burned.
Helen Gandy admitted to it in court, said that's the one thing she promised Hoover, that when he died, she'd spend the next, 3 days in his house burning files with an FBI agent.
Right, exactly. and did. So at least they're true to their word. You
I
know?
think it's because these people, why they were so, like, for instance, Hoover being put in power for till he dies, basically, was not just a close relationship with LBJ. There was no kind of like, yeah, that might have helped a little bit. But at the same time, Hoover had the dirt. Hoover knew what to do. Hoover could get things done, and people went to him when they needed something done. Because Hoover would listen. Hoover never really used his blackmail until it was like issues like with Earl Warren trying to serve on the Warren Commission. Earl Warren denied LBJ twice and denied RFK. So this became something where Hoover had to get blackmail on a little incident in Mexico, and Earl Warren decided, yes, I will do it for you, and changed his tune. So again, this is issues and things where you start learning about this side of politics, and you start realizing that the conspiracy is a lot more believable than just all this stuff happened and our government's totally corrupt. It doesn't have to be some grandiose, Illuminati type thing, but it kind of shows that these are people, and people are vulnerable to blackmail. People are vulnerable to getting the worst side of them to come out when trying to get what they need or what they want. And that's what can be seen throughout all of them history, and not just American history.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Um, I don't know, Robbie. I think the older I've gotten, I'm much more open to things that you're saying, as I was even just a few years ago. And I think, where there's strong evidence, we have it's okay to be a little dogmatic if you want to be. But if the evidence isn't as overwhelming, then we say, well, this is my best guess based on what it is. And like you say, people have jobs, all kinds of things are at stake here that it's easy for us to dismiss because we're not inside that arena. But if we would have been, what would we have done? I'd like to think I would do the right thing, but heck, who knows? If my pension's on the line, my career's on the line, would I have capitulated? I don't know. I hope I'm never in that spot. I'd like to think I'm, a true blue kind of a guy, but I at least can understand why people do some. And here's what I would say. I think one of the greatest discoveries and moments in the JFK assassination is the ARRB. The people who they brought up to interview, I think was very, very telling. Whether it was the person who took autopsy pictures, where whoever it is, talking to the doctors, subpoenaed these people, that was absolutely magic as far as I'm concerned, and it needed to be done. And I think for the most part, what's the gentleman's name? I know you've tried to get him on your program. Guy who asked all the
Oh,
questions.
gun.
Yeah, Jeremy Gunn. I think when I read the transcripts and listen to some of it, you can get the audio on the Mary Farrell site. I think he asked very good questions, and I think he got to the bottom of a lot of things, to the point that there's not, the thing about Humes, for example, in 1964, Dr. Hume said the wound was low in the back of Kennedy's head. Then in 1978, he seems to cave to the forensic pathology panel and say, well, even though they say, well, there's about a 10 centimeter difference, he goes, well, I wouldn't be terribly comfortable with that. He doesn't really admit it, but he kind of goes along with it. And then before the ARRB, he goes back to his 1964 low entry in the back of the head. And then he writes the ARRB a letter after he gets home from being interviewed by Gunn. He says, my position is no, take that back. Before the ARB, he looks at Gunn and comparing the 64 and 78 positions in 1996, whenever it was, he was interviewed. He looks at Gunn, he says, I don't know where the wound was. You don't know where the wound was? I mean, you've taken one position, somewhat capitulate to the forensic pathology panel. Now you're telling Jeremy Gunn you don't have a clue where it was. Then when he gets home, he writes a letter back to Jeremy Gunn saying that he's gonna officially go back to his 1964 statement. It was a low entry in the back of JFK's head. So this guy's all over the place. 64, 78, 96. He has completely different positions on where that wound is. I here's what I have to believe, Robbie. I don't care who you are. You're looking at the back of JFK's head at the autopsy. I find it very difficult to believe you would ever forget where that wound was. You're not looking at the back of my head. You're looking back at the President of the United States. You're not going to forget where that is. You're going to be scrutinized. And now you're saying, I don't know. I don't know where it was. What? There may be an explanation for that. I just don't know what it would be.
Why is it more believable that the LAPD destroyed a bunch of files dealing with the RFK assassination and that evidence never came to light because Sirhan pled guilty, but the Lee Harvey Oswald and people just railroading his body kind of in a sense of dumping all this evidence on him that came out after the fact, and evidence that really does not hold together quite well under scrutiny. Why is it so believable that one LAPD one could be conspiracy, but then you get to the JFK one and it's not? Is it because it's a president type thing, or this is deeper in our government dealing with so many other outlets and issues, when we all understand that they're just people that are honestly more culpable of not admitting when they fucked up compared to just saying, yeah. Like, how many witnesses or people that had information that could have been beneficial to the case that came out way after the fact, not just because they're scared of their lives because of the number of witnesses that died in weird circumstances, but the factor of like, yeah, I mean, I messed up, and I would really, all these years later, it's taken me forever to come to the point where I want to admit that I did, and here's the evidence to support that this is not right, and this is what actually happened.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's a good question.
Well,
The
it's not
easy
an
answer,
easy thing to say that you're wrong.
no, it's not. Now, none, pride is a wicked, wicked sin, as I always say. And as a result of that, very few people will say, you know what, on second thought, I was wrong. You don't hear that uttered very often. And in this case, which is high stakes are at play, you never hear anybody say that I can think of off the top of my head, unless there's just one I'm spacing out and forgetting. You have people who are very forthright, but I don't know of anybody who's ever said, "Yeah, I was wrong on this particular point in the Kennedy assassination." They will take that to their grave, even if they know they're wrong. They'll take it to their grave. It's just so hard for people to go, "I was wrong." And the more I've thought about it over the years, I'm thinking, boy, this is a ridiculous position to take. You know how many times I've been wrong in my life? I mean, almost daily sometimes, but and to deny that, you're not being genuine, you're not being authentic, and I think, uh, I'd like to think it's within the nature of all of us to try to be as authentic and genuine as I can. To do that, though, it takes courage because you have to be transparent, and people are a little afraid to do that. They'll see us for who we really are. Well, I know who I am, and I know that I'm full of all types of flaws and inconsistencies. So look away is what I'd say. I made, the things that I used to believe on the Kennedy assassination would be embarrassing if I told you and the listeners today. Absolutely embarrassing. But at the time, that's all I knew. Evidence wasn't as easily accessible as it is today. And so I made some really, really silly blunders. Following the evidence is sincere. I was sincere, but I was sincerely wrong. And when I was sincerely wrong and realized it, it's time to say, you know what, I used to believe blah, blah, blah. I no longer believe that. It doesn't hold up. It's okay to say that. The world's not going to come to an end. In fact, you may make a little more headway if you do say those things. I don't know.
I found myself many times, like someone, with my girlfriend's parents or whatever, would ask something like, "Hey, I heard you're into the Kennedy assassination." I'm like, "Yeah." And like, say you research conspiracies. It's like, depends what you define as conspiracies. Like, don't just hit me with 9/11 right afterwards and then ask me about aliens and shit. I look at it from a kind of a factual, try my best to find the factual, like, what are
I
issues
agree.
and things that have been proven and are not contentious. I'm not looking for who did it. I don't really have an opinion on who. I'm looking at the factor of there's a lot of things that support evidence of a cover up, and I would like to know why that is a cover up. Is it
I
because of
agree.
incompetence and all these things? And I would list off a couple of things, and I found them starting to get a little bit less from the joking type questioning to more of like the, okay, so then what about this? And then they
Right.
started getting, and that's what I find is the common ground here, which is I think conspiracies and low nutters can both agree on the same point, is that they're trying to talk about the truth or find the truth.
Sure.
Their truths might be very, very different, but I feel like a lot of it lies somewhere in the middle. To admit that there's no faults by the Warren Commission is to have a stupid understanding of the Warren Commission,
Oh,
because they admitted their own faults.
right. Exactly.
But also to say everything's Illuminati and it's all some grand cover up and that the MK Ultra is involved throughout this whole entire thing. There is a little bit at the end, but not throughout the whole case. And a lot of this can be are not chalked up to just Illuminati dealings. It's chalked up to just bad investigative work. Whether that was on purpose or whether that was accidental, I don't know. But also, it's very hard when you're scrambling at this moment, trying to come up with an answer as quickly as possible rather than what's right.
It is. And some of the scientists, there was some really bad science and bad scientists, and they may be even a good scientist, but I think careers are at stake, grants are at stake, money's at stake, and I think people do weird things when those types of things are involved. I guess my attitude is if I'm talking to someone like you or someone like Craig, or if I were to ever talk with David Shine, which you've done at least a couple of times, sounds like a third time, these are people that I respect. And so if I respect you, I'm going to listen very carefully to what you have to say. And if I don't agree with you, I better have some good reasons why I don't not just brush you off and not take you seriously. There are people in the case who I don't take seriously at all. I'll give you a real quick example of that very quickly. I was down the local library a couple of years ago, and this guy was there talking about the Kennedy assassination. I was, oh, I'll go hear him. It was the weirdest theory you have ever heard in your life. The theory was JFK was shot. They lifted the back seat up on the way to the hospital, threw his body in the trunk, and whipped out a corpse to take us. I mean, you can't make this up, Robbie. It was so utterly ridiculous. The only thing it reminds me of is you had a guy on your program once that was saying the most
No, I don't want to talk about that. I know what you're talking about. I know you're talking
oh,
about.
yeah, but it was that kind of a thing. You listen, you go, what did you just say? The only thing I'll say about that guy on your program is I never saw the program. I don't think it was ever published, was it?
No, I published it. You hear me go, oh, fuck, as soon as he says who he thought did it. Because I was like, oh, that's going to get me right off YouTube.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
again, you can choose to who you want to be the person, your enemy, and all this type of stuff. It boils back to the motive question. I've talked to a lot of people who study true crime, scientists, researchers, trying to figure out why people love it so much, trying to figure out motive for murder, trying to figure out why there's always this. The hardest thing to understand is why someone does something.
Right. I
Why
agree.
does if you want to believe Lee Harvey Oswald, why? It's hardest thing to understand besides going, he's a nut, or he's this, or he wanted popularity, and all these other types of things that totally contradict the record of what we have on him, based on a factual thing. Sounds like a whole completely different person. And that's why you get two different Oswalds. That's why you get, did he go to Mexico City or not? I go, when you're so resistant to looking at other things that are going to possibly change your opinion. And again, I've had people that have become a lot more, not conspiratorial, but a little bit more balanced in the sense of like coming more towards like, I'm looking at the conspiracy, but all I can find is evidence for it in the cover up. I can't tell you that like this gun was planted here, was marked at this time. He went to a dead drop and picked up a letter saying Kennedy was gone. I don't know. A lot of this just looks like nobody was paying attention and doing their job properly. They were all in autopilot mode and were not paying attention. The Secret Service was out drinking the night before. Connolly was supposed to be doing certain things when it came to the parade route. He did not at all because he was already focused too much on his election that was going to be coming up and what he was running for. And there was a lot of things going on where you start noticing, okay, you guys took like almost a month and a half to handle whether you were going to have his speech or his lunch at. Was it going to be the Trade Mart or was it going to be the Women's Center? This was an issue. And what was your decision? Well, I thought this, but I left it up to my team, my close associates. And I go, did they ever talk to you once about it? I guaranteed you they didn't bother him one time because he was too focused on something else. And he admits that in the HSCA testimony. So again, not a lack of I don't care about JFK, but it's something where it's like they're already focused on their own careers. Like they don't have time to be doing an investigation into who murdered the president. That's not going to get them what they want. They want to be governor of Texas.
You're right. You're right. I think for me, what is the most frustrating, and I'm sure you've experienced this, having interviewed, had discussions with a ton of people on your program over the years, is that people just dig their heels in from second number one. And no matter what you say, they have an answer. No matter what you never hear very many people say, well, I don't know. I'll have to think about that. I'm not sure. Uh, when you had Posner on your show, which I thought was a good show, and he at least when he admitted fairly early on when he said, Robbie, if the acoustics evidence is true, then there was a conspiracy, game over. He just doesn't believe it's true, so obviously he doesn't believe that. But at least he said that, and I have somewhat respect for that, that he would at least admit that because it's a true statement. If the acoustics is true, it is game over, my friend. Now that doesn't tell you who did it, may not even tell you why, but definitely there would be a conspiracy for sure. But the problem I have is so many people on both sides have been guilty of this. They just dig their feet in and they know every answer to everything immediately. It's like, I'm sorry, I'm just not that good. I don't know how people know everything that quickly. You may have an answer, but my goodness, it's okay once in a while to say, you know what, I'm not sure. I don't know. It's okay. I mean, unless you're omniscient, you probably should say that once in a while. But most people don't. They just dig in, on both sides, to be honest with you. I mean, there are people who believe in conspiracy who are just as weird, strange, and I think wrong as people who believe in lone nut. I really do. And I would not want them on my team if we were on some massive debate, on both sides of the coin. Some people I absolutely would want on my side, but some people like no, because all of a sudden when you're talking about it, and the first thing out of your mouth is, well, the body was hijacked and they did surgery on the body. Stop, stop. Do you know how that's, even if it's true, you better tame that. Do you have any idea how that sounds to John Q. Citizen? It sounds like you're a nut, is what it sounds like. And so if that's the first thing out of your mouth, I would be a little careful. And I'm not going to name names, but there are people who have done that, that take that particular position. I'm thinking, man, that just does not come. You're going to come across, and people like Posner wait for people like that to appear because they just have them for breakfast. And at that point, I agree with Posner on probably what he's going to say, but I don't know.
See, I find myself getting upset with that just as much as I get upset when someone's like, I've read the Warren Commission twice, okay? And I'm like, do you remember every fucking word off of every single page you read? Because I guarantee to you, you forgot 2 pages before because our brain's only paying attention to the new shit you're taking in.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So and I think a lot of people, when someone says that, my first thought is, no, you haven't. Just stop. No, you haven't. I mean, I have a friend of mine, and I mean, I
It's
know him
just
very
like some type
well.
of thing of authority or something. And every time I hear someone say it, I just want to tell them, shut up, stop.
When someone says that, it's like what they're really saying is now, based on that, everything I say henceforth will be the gospel truth. No, because I don't believe that. I do know someone who claims to have read it 6 times. And if you know him, you probably go, yeah, he probably has read it 6 times. I mean, he wrote over 40,000 pages on the Kennedy assassination. One document alone was 33,000 pages. So it took him 7 years to do it. This guy he read everything. And so if anybody ever did, he probably did. I have no doubt people have read it maybe once or twice. But most people that say that, my first thought, and I won't say anything, but in my back of my mind, I'm going, no, you haven't. I mean, I've read the first 5 volumes of the HSCA probably maybe 2, 3, 4 times, in some cases more than that, going over the same testimony over and over and over. But now ask me how much of that I can recall off the top of my head. Well, that's a different ball game because that's a lot of information to be able to recall. And like you said, 2 pages earlier, I now I forgot what was 2 pages earlier. So unless you have this eidetic Sheldon memory from the Big Bang Theory, you're probably not going to remember a whole lot of that, to be honest with you. You got to go. That's why I got to go over it again and again and again. So I don't know.
I mean, I've listened to those audio tapes of the HSCA so many times, but I could tell you the things that stick out in my mind are like the things with the LBJ tapes where he's talking to Abe Fortas on the phone and a random call gets through the line. And it's just a person going, hello, hello. And he's like, who is this? And he goes, this is Mary out of Virginia. And he's like, Mary out of Virginia? Where? What? And then, she's like, who is this? And he goes, this is President Lyndon Johnson. She goes, oh. And he goes, do you mind getting off the line? You just hear Abe Fortas in the background just go, Jesus Christ. And he's like, he's literally, it's funny. And he's upset because he's like, oh my God. He's like, get the hell off the line, and says it to the woman because they don't know what's going on. And again, the lines back then weren't as secure. So people would sometimes just bleed through or an accidental call would go out. But that's the funny stuff that sticks in my mind, not the other calls about policy and certain moves and navigations in Vietnam. There are some things that stick out, but it's against the other things. That's why that question always gets me, or that statement always gets me, like you're the authority because you read the Warren Commission 3 times. Okay. Well, I wanted to kind of get it up here on like an ending question. Again, we're giving you a summary, people listening. This is Tim Smith has gone into in-depth work on certain parts of the Kennedy assassination and the RFK assassination, and we're going to be doing a panel discussion with Craig. If you want to go back and look at his stuff, please do. It's a fun listen. I listen back to him every now and again just to be able to hear us go back and forth about certain things like the headshot on the Zapruder film and things of that sort. But I wanted to kind of ask you one that's going to kind of wrap up the show because I'm pretty sure it's a long answer you'll have. When you're looking at these things and you start investigating conspiracy, and again, a lot of people take that like, oh, you investigate conspiracies. It is a work. It is a job. It is something of research and actual study, and it does enhance your intellect when you're looking at all these varying things and factors you have to include, including the Cold War, other things that are going on in the time period to better understand why this went a certain way. When you handle it from like I'm a Kennedy assassination researcher perspective, like a lot of people claim that title, but I've guaranteed you and others that I've talked to actually probably fit that narrative of a Kennedy assassination researcher because you do the work, you go through the documentation, you're looking, and you're not just looking for something that's going to get the most attention. I wanted to ask you, how difficult has it been as a person who researches not only the Kennedy assassination but the RFK assassination? Because a lot of things, takes years to come out, but at the same time, the amount of reciprocation from people when you had introduced that as a subject or something that you look at or you learn about, it tends to be met with like glass eyes or just kind of like, I don't want to get into this conversation, mostly because they're afraid it's going to go into that extremist angle. So I wanted to kind of understand your perspective a little bit about what it's been like to teach about the Kennedy assassination, but also at the same time research it yourself and wonder, am I doing something that's actually going to help me in my own understanding of how things work?
Sure. That's a good question. Um,
Thanks. It was a long one.
yeah, I've given a lot of talks at public venues, mostly libraries, but some churches, different places. And the f- the people that come out to listen, they seem to be really interested in the case. There's always a few that will come out that will try to prove to everyone there that they know more than I do. And I don't play the game. I don't really attack them. I just let them talk whatever because that doesn't mean anything to me. I'm not there. It's not a competition, and so I don't care about things like that. But most people that come out, they seem to be very sincere in wanting to understand what happened to John Kennedy a long time ago. um, uh, I've had good luck with talking to other researchers about the case. Most researchers that I've talked to have been very kind, very forthcoming, willing to share evidence. Whether it's our friend Craig or whoever it is. So that has been very positive. I've met some wonderful people, to be honest with you, that are a lot of my friends are friends because of the Kennedy assassination, and that's okay. Not everybody. Um, but for example, my wife and I were at someone's house about a month ago, and there was a couple there who we had never met before, and something came up about the Kennedy assassination. I'm getting much better at when I comment on it to keep it really short. If you do, you'll be much more effective than if you go on some long 35-minute rant, because they'll get lost because they don't know the case well enough to even know what you're talking about. But there was a gentleman there. He said, "Yeah, people were watching it that day on TV." And I said, "Well, actually, they weren't. That was a later edition. We discovered the Zapruder film, but the Zapruder film was not being shown live on TV because how would you hook that up to a camera to begin with, which you couldn't. But I didn't make him feel stupid. I just said, no, just to clarify, they really didn't. And I think that's what you have to do. You have to be kind to people. You have to be a little patient because they haven't put the time in that we have, Robbie, and they just don't know. And so they will make statements. And I don't seize every opportunity to say, aha, correction. I don't do that. I think that's ridiculous. If it's really important and they seem like they're really interested in the case, maybe strike up a conversation. But the last thing I want to do is debate them or anybody else on it, to be honest with you, because nobody's going to admit anything during a debate. They're too busy digging their feet in. So I just try to take opportunities to share with people if the opportunity arises, and realize that a lot of my friends don't know much of anything about the Kennedy assassination, and that's okay. There's different reasons why we're friends with different people, and that's okay. If they do show an interest in it, it's kind of fun because I obviously have an interest in it. Um, I torment my students from time to time about it, and I probably say too much, but sometimes it's just kind of fun to talk about it, and sometimes they'll ask really good questions, and sometimes they won't. That's okay. Um, there was I gave you an example. There's one young lady at a talk I was giving at a local library, and she says, "Were you aware of the fact that the bubble top was in the trunk of the car and only half of it was in there?" I said, "Well, I don't know where you got that information." She said, "Well, I was on the internet." I said, "Well, you got to be careful of that." I said, "Here's how we know that that statement's not true, because before that limousine left Parkland Hospital, the entire bubble top, the entire roof was put on the car. So obviously the whole thing had to be in there." Now, I don't want to make her feel dumb for that. I want to maybe chastise the internet. I don't want to chastise her and just say, we probably all need to be a little careful. And I'll word it that way. We all need to be a little more careful because it applies to me too. We've all repeated things that, probably aren't very accurate. So, overall, my experience, Robbie, I think has been a positive one. I've learned a lot going into this. What did I know about ballistics or photography or acoustics? I've learned a lot about a lot of different topics that I had to defer to experts who are way smarter than me on these topics. But in the process of doing that, I've learned a lot. and I've enjoyed doing so. I've enjoyed the friendships that I've made. And now I'm at a point in my life, I guess, where I'm a little more laid back, and I would try to steer the conversation to just that, a conversation like we have here when we're talking. We have conversations. You don't have a list of things that, for sure you're going to ask Tim Smith and that type of an interview. That doesn't usually work very well. It's probably why you chose the format that you did. And I think that is a lesson in life, that my biggest successes isn't because I convince anybody of anything. What I try to do is just try to have conversation with people, not be overly cocky or dogmatic. Just say, well, and just be that. I think we'll go a lot further and be a lot more successful. If we're really trying to convince anybody of anything, you'll be more successful if you do that than if you do the other. So overall, it's been a very positive experience for me. And I used to say to people, if I could do this over again, I wouldn't have done it. But I no longer believe that. If I had to do it over again, I would have done it, because in a sense, I've learned a lot more about history than I would have known had I not gotten into it. So I don't have very many negative things to say about the whole experience, to be honest with you.
Well, Tim, I always appreciate our conversations, and I appreciate all the times we've been able to get together and talk about the subject that we obviously both care about a lot. And it seems like a lot of people out there do too. So hopefully they get something from this conversation and be able to look at your past episodes as well too. Tim, I will link all your stuff in the description below, but if you want to tell people where they can find your book or any other links that you might have, and anything you would like to say to people on a wrapping point before we close out the show.
Yeah, the only other link would be, I know my book's on eBay and it's on Amazon, but that's about all. I hear you can get it through Walmart, but you'll never see it in Walmart. You can only order it through Walmart. That's the way that goes. And so yeah, I hopefully people will get a copy of the book, and not because I make money if they buy a copy of the book. I don't make a dime at this point. So just hopefully it will shed some light on what was going on in the second governmental investigation of the Kennedy assassination.
And thank you everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next episode.